Vladimir Putin has always been worried about Russia ending up in a confrontation with the West, and NATO in particular. His constant concern was that NATO would end up directly on Russia's borders after all the former Warsaw Pact countries chose to join NATO. His paranoia on this matter drove him to instigate a proxy rebellion in the Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast of Ukraine. He did this knowing full well that NATO would never accept a new member who was already involved in a war. After sending troops into Crimea on the 23rd of February 2014 and receiving only limited sanctions from the West, Putin then instigated the so-called People's Rebellions in the Donbass regions on the 6th of April 2014 and thereby seized the industrial heartland of Ukraine. His paranoia with NATO only increased in 2004 when his former Soviet republics of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania joined NATO, putting the alliance directly on Russia's borders for the first time. His fear of the West led him in 2000 to float the idea of Russia joining NATO, but an application was never submitted for consideration, and even if they had applied to join the alliance, unanimous consent is required by all members for a new member to join. And since the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland had joined just a year earlier, they'd hardly be amenable to Russia being accepted after living under both Russian and Soviet domination for most of the prior century. The US and UK, among other NATO members, made no secret of their training of the Ukrainian military and the tactics and operations that they would use to wage war and in the use of modern weapons. In doing this, the Ukrainian army was transformed from a Soviet-era blunt instrument into a modern military with professional NCO corps capable of reacting to situations in front of them constructively, as opposed to the Soviet-style army that does nothing without orders from on high. In his paranoia, Putin worried that Ukraine would seek to join NATO, so to forestall this, he made the decision to invade Ukraine so he could install a Moscow-friendly government and keep Ukraine from joining the EU and NATO. He'd already succeeded at that when he annexed Crimea and instigated the situation in the Donbass. Both the EU and NATO made it painfully clear that as long as Ukraine was in a conflict along its borders, it would not be able to join until those issues, among others, were taken care of. So in his paranoia, he decided he had to take a preemptive action against a threat that wasn't there. He invaded Ukraine. NATO made it clear that they will not put boots on the ground in Ukraine. They never said anything about not training and supplying weapons to Ukraine either. Now many of the members of the alliance are supplying Ukraine with weapons that are at least a generation newer than what the Russians have, and the longer Putin continues to wage total war on Ukraine, Ukraine receives newer and newer and some of the best equipment that we have. So in his fear of a conflict with the West, he inadvertently started one. Now he has a situation that his mobilization of close to 1 million men can't solve. He has to train all those men, most of whom have little or no military experience, in a very short time and get them to the front ready to fight, except he cannot even properly supply them with equipment. On the other hand, specialized units of the Ukrainian army are being taken to training areas in Germany and other countries and are being trained up on how to use the weapons and technology the West is supplying them with, and which Russia cannot hope to match. NATO has always been a defensive alliance. Anytime that they have done any offensive operations, it has been at the behest of the United Nations Security Council, of which Russia is a member. Mr. Putin's fear has become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it may bring about his end as a modern Tsar of Russia.